What's up, Rupert here, the Natural Capitalist, and in this video I'm going to be diving deep into a really hot topic right now, which is particularly around a couple of boxers that are in the Olympics, and it's all around gender, right? Gender ideology, defining what is man, what is woman, what is male, what is female, and I'm just going to try and make sense of it, right? Because I posted something up on my Facebook, copped a bit of heat from it from my lefty activist friends, a few people getting triggered. So here we go. We're just going to dive in and see if I can make sense of it, right? Now, the first thing I want us to look at is this media guide, which is for the 2024 Paris Olympics about males in women's events. Now, what does that mean? We've got males competing in women's events at the 2024 Olympics, and this organization, the International Consortium on Female Sport, have put out a media guide saying, hey, this is how to deal with males in women's events, provided by the International Consortium on Female Sport and the Independent Council of Women's Sports. Now, we're going to look at these organizations in a minute, who they are, how they've come about. But let's look at this media guide. During the Olympics, you may hear about male athletes competing or seeking to compete in the women's category. Now, this guide contains fact-based answers to a few questions that arise when this happens. Well, I've got questions if there's men competing in the women's categories, or should I say males, biological males. Here we go. Who are the males who want to compete in the women's category? Well, there's two situations. The first is when a male who identifies as a woman seeks to compete as a woman. And the second is when an athlete who has a genetic profile of a male and a medical condition known as a difference in sexual development, a DSD, seeks to compete as a woman. In both cases, these athletes have experienced the permanent sports performance enhancing effects of being male, i.e. gone through puberty, male puberty, and have elevated, it's got many factors, but the most influential is elevated testosterone, and you get basically permanent changes in the physical body, and then this increases greater sports performance in males compared to females. But isn't there a lot of overlap in the performance of men and women? No. Sports are defined by strength, speed, power, and endurance. Men outperform women by between 10 and 50% depending on the sport, right? In athletics, track and field, and swimming, there are hundreds and even thousands of males who are faster than the fastest females, and the world records for women have been bested in most events by numerous 14 to 15-year-old boys, okay? These are just facts. This is just objective facts. But don't T levels overlap in males and females, and isn't sex a continuum? No, T levels drastically increase in males at puberty, and their effects are permanent. We're talking like orders of magnitude more. Outside of rare, specific medical conditions, T levels do not overlap in adults, males, and females, right? So there is some conditions where there is overlap, but biological sex is binary. At its fundamental level, females are defined by large gametes, eggs, and males by small gametes, sperm. There are over 6,500 genes which expresses differences between males and females, and individuals with rare DSD syndromes are still male or female. So basically they're saying when we trace it right back to that foundational level, and there's lots of scientific studies been done on this, which is pretty much primarily how you determine sex is via the XY chromosomes. This is the fundamental difference, and everything else, all the other variations, although intersex, can be traced back to that piece right there. Okay, isn't everything okay if these athletes just suppress their testosterone? No. All scientific studies have shown that reducing T to the female range for years in males does not abolish the difference in strength and endurance that males typically have over females, right? So even when they reduce their T, the drop in performance is less than the typical sex differences between males and females. In other words, males on testosterone suppression still retain a sports performance advantage over females. This is why such athletes typically will place higher when competing against women compared to when they are competing against men. All right. Okay, so this is what's going on. The Olympics are about participation. Why should we exclude these athletes? Requiring competition to be based on sex excludes no one. Everyone is welcome to compete in the category consistent with their sex. What are the rules about who can compete in the women's category? Are there rules? Sorry. Are the rules about who can compete in the women's category consistent for all Olympic sport? This is what it's saying. No, the International Olympic Committee, the IOC, does not have a policy on eligibility for women's category. Rather, they leave it to the governing body of each sport, right? So you can imagine all these sports around the world, they've all got their own regional bodies, national bodies, and an international coordination unit to help pull it all into the Olympics. And they leave it to these organizations to make the decisions. Except when it comes to boxing. We'll have a look at that in a second. The athlete is female and has always competed. What about the non-binary runner competing for the American team? This athlete is female and has always competed in the women's category. Okay, so it sounds like there's a non-binary runner in the American team, but she's actually female all the time anyway. Now, this is interesting. What terminology should journalists use to describe athletes? Sex is the strongest determinant. Report and talk about the sex of an athlete, not the gender. Language that ignores or obfuscates sex of an athlete is harmful and discriminatory to women. The terms male and female are clear and respectful scientific language which reflect the reality of the human body, right? These terms must take precedence over language of personal identification and beliefs in order to preserve the rights and safety of female athletes, right? They're talking about the safety here, and this is why it's really hot topic, because we're not just talking about weightlifting or swimming. We're talking about boxing, right? This is punches to the head. This is violence. This is the speciality of men with their physical prowess in the physical body. We are specialists in violence. Now, this is wild, right? Okay. Now, the IOC media guide for the 2024 Olympics serves to undermine the rights of women to be accurately represented in our fight against sex-based discrimination, right? So there's a whole movement of females out there, biological females, who are saying they are being discriminated against because of their sex by allowing gender to be the defining characteristic as to who can and can't compete in the Olympics. And we're going to look at what the IOC has in place, because they say, well, no, each sport defines who can be in the eligibility, except for boxing. And so the IOC's got their own guide for that. Okay, see, and then the IOC put out a media guide saying, do not use the terms born male, born female, biologically female, because this is dehumanizing and inaccurate when used to describe transgenders people and people with a sex variation. Okay, and these guys are saying there's nothing dehumanizing or inaccurate in reporting the sex of an athlete. What is dehumanizing is to ignore the sex-based reality of sports performance advantage. Okay, so these guys, these women, this was a women organization. Now let's have a look at who they are and what they are about. Okay, so the purpose of this organization, the International Consortium for Female Sports, is to advocate for the preservation of the female sports category. Fairness and safety for female athletes in sport is ensured by having a dedicated category for those born female. This is what they're asking for, right? It's not women's category anymore, it's people who are born female. All right, they're a non-partisan, single-issue collective of women from across the political spectrum, and basically saying it has no political affiliation. They're referring to some statements about discrimination, right? So that the IOC has got their own charter, no one should be discriminated, and all of these things, respect, all this stuff, right? So they've got all this stuff going on. Now, they put out this media guide because at a pivotal time, the IOC and various sports governing bodies are examining their policies regarding gender and competition. It has been over 20 years since the IOC stopped sex-based verification of Olympians in the female category, right? So I think it was from the 60s right up until 1999. It was a swab test. Take a swab, show that you genetically are female, and then you can compete in the female category. Its abandonment over fair and ethical competition for females has led to the IOC's recent inaccurate insistence that males should not be deemed to have an unfair or disproportionate competitive advantage over female athletes in Olympic sports. Okay, said Coach Linda Blade. Now, she has been on this campaign for a long time. She used to compete in a lot of things. She's been active in the sports space for a long time, and she's one of the founding members of this organization. The IOC now encourages journalists to obscure and lie whenever a man self-identifies into a woman's competition. Women here the world over are saying no to this absurdity. Okay, so what's going on? We've got the boxes. Let's pull up this article here. Let's see, where is it? I don't even think I have it here anymore. Yes, here we go. No, okay, it's gone. That's all right. Okay, so Joint Paris 2024 Boxing Unit Statement. They're saying that every person has the right to practice sport without discrimination. Basically, they have the Paris Boxing Unit. So remember, the IOC lets all of the sports organize themselves and decide who's in and who's out, except for boxing, because the IOC and the International Boxing Association have been at heads for a while. I'll get into what happened there in a minute. So basically, they're at heads. The IOC has said, hey, we're not recognizing you, the IBA, anymore. We are going to take and organize the boxing ourselves based on our rules. Now, what's our rules? Well, it's basically, if you self-nominate as man, female, and it says female on your passport, then, you're in. This is what's going on. It's a pretty crazy situation, right? We got these two boxers who are, so it's Khalif and Lin Yuping. I think I had that article up somewhere. It's gone at the moment. Let me see if I can bring this up. This one here is good. Right, so really what the heat of the topic is, this Olympic boxing controversy, which sparks a fierce debate over inclusivity in women's sports. You can see here Taipei's Lin Yuting shakes hands with Uzbekistan's Storia Turdibekova, right? And she does not look happy. She's not looking him in the eye. The women here are protesting. There's a whole bunch of stuff happening. Got to see what's happening here. Let's see what's happening, right? So it's not about Khalif of Algeria and Lu Ting of Taiwan. It's not how they identify. It seems that they were born as women. They got women on their birth certificate. They were raised as women, but they have an unusual body chemistry, which is called, what we're talking about, this sex difference disorder, difference in sex disorder. And so basically they have XY chromosome. They get to puberty, and then they go through the male puberty process, right? And they become physically stronger. And then it becomes obvious that they are not just a normal, typical female, biological female, even though they've been raised as one. Which must be hard, right? Like these intersex conditions do naturally exist, but they exist as exceptions from the norm, from the generalized norm, which is biological binary sex, male, female, XX, XY chromosomes. This is how we reproduce, right? Most of the time, all of these people that have these naturally genetic variations to that binary thing, right? So I'm not saying that argument doesn't exist, but they're basically spin-offs in the evolutionary process, and that they often can't have kids, right? So they can't reproduce. So that's the end of life for them, or life in terms of intergenerationally. So that's it. So we're talking about generalization, yes. We're talking about the norms and how biology works, right? Let's have a look here. But the Olympics have broader eligibility rules, right? So basically, the Olympics is now based on gender. They dropped the sex tests 25 years ago, and it's now based on gender. Now, this Linda Blade, who is the founding member of this organization, is done a chapter for the Women's Declaration International, which is another women's organization, talking about how this gender ideology has crept in and is now discriminating against biological females, right? Like there's a whole bunch of biological females who say, hey, we're being discriminated against based on our sex because of this gender ideology. Now you can see here, we're going to play this video, which is a great presentation she gives, summarizing the last 20-25 years of how this has all happened. So I really recommend people watch this. Obviously, no one is up to speed on this because this has got 73 views on the 31st of July over the last 5 days when all of this heat has been happening. So this is one of Linda's most recent presentations. Let's just have a look at this for the minute.
And while it was published in 2023, the contents of what I wrote only went up to 2022. So what I'd like to do in this presentation is briefly review, for those of you who might not have read the chapter, briefly review some of the absurdities I covered in the chapter, and then go on to discuss developments since. A very quick review of the absurdities that I was dealing with early on. We had absurdity number one, Olympic betrayals, many of them actually, but especially from 2000 to 2015. We had, in the year 2000, the IOC, Olympic Committee, abandoned sex screening to make sure that there were no males in female sports. And then in 2003, they quietly admitted transsexuals. So surgery was required, but males would be allowed to compete with women starting from 2003 officially by the IOC. And then in 2015, there was the final capitulation to gender identity ideology because a few men felt put out by the 2003 requirement. The International Olympic Committee dropped the requirement for surgery and said a man could simply self-identify for a year as a woman, whatever that means, reduce his testosterone to compete with women, thereby turning all female athletes simply into a reduced testosterone level, which of course we all know is not true. Absurdity number two.
All right, so this is what Linda Blade is saying, that basically this process within the Olympics has been going on for 25 years. And I've looked at the IOC's documents here. We've got the IOC saying they've got their principles, their inclusivity principles, and it's all about basically saying it's gender identity. That's how they decide. If we look at some of the statements that the president and spokesperson have said, it's really, oh, well, you know, she says woman on her passport, was born as a female, raised as a female. So then, you know, for us, that's good enough, right? We don't need to do a gender, we don't need to do a sex-based biological test because we're following our own rules, right? They're basically following their own rules. So this is the true maliciousness in it, because they can sit here and go, well, we're just following our rules. We're doing everything right within their rules that they've spelt out, but it's not right within our hearts, right? And in the order of things. And people know this because when you look at those fights, it's not a fair fight, right? It's, even though it's the same weight category, we have biological males beating up biological females. Come on, this is what's happening, people. It's crazy. Now, this is the example of the doublespeak within the IOC, right? Prevention of harm. The physical, psychological, and mental well-being of athletes should be prioritized when establishing eligibility criteria, right? So the IOC has got their framework for who gets included, even though each body has to do it for themselves. They're saying, hey, this is how you should do it, okay? And they're actually getting a lot of pushback from a lot of the organizations around the world. There's a whole bunch of cases where these organizations are saying no to these biological males who are trying to compete with biological females. So sports organizations should identify and prevent negative direct and indirect impacts of athletes' health and well-being that may come from the design, implementation, or interpretation of eligibility criteria. So basically, on their own guidelines, they're breaching it, right? Because by having biological males within these sports, it's putting the health and safety and lives of these other biological females in the competition at risk. But at the same time, right, do not discriminate against anybody based on their gender identity, physical appearance, or sex variations, right? And provided they meet eligibility criteria that's consistent with Principle 4, athletes get to compete in the category that best aligns with their self-determined gender identity. So basically, as long as you self-identify as woman, you get to compete as woman, right? But of course, you can't, fake it. There's a thing here talking about fairness, preventing athletes from claiming a gender identity different to the one consistently and persistently used with a view of entering a competition, right? So they're having all these things in place, but it's all doublespeak, right? Because the next one says no presumption of advantage. No athlete should be precluded from competing or excluded from the competition because of an unverified, alleged, or perceived unfair advantage due to their sex variation, physical appearance, or transgender status. Okay, so they're basically saying one thing on one hand and then the other on the other, completely inconsistent. And this is how we got to this point, right? This is why some people are so upset. All right, and these guys, this is back to their statement, right? And the IOC, we can see that the IOC's got their own guide saying, hey, don't use these things that's born male, born female, biologically female, because we want to confuse people. Instead, use girl, boy, man, woman, transgender, boy, girl, right? Because these are all looser definitions, right? These are scientific things, and these are looser definitions. So this is what's going on. This is why it's a war on words. It's a culture war. This is the tip of the iceberg. There is a massive iceberg underneath. I'm going to put the link to this presentation in below. What else have we got here? We've got, okay, the PBU, the Parents Boxing Unit. Now, back to this beef between the IOC and the IBA. This is a really, really interesting one. All right, we'll look at this article from The Guardian. This is, what is this? A year old. The final bell is sounded for the governing body of amateur boxing after the International Olympic Committee voted to expel the International Boxing Association from the Olympic movement. This is the first time they have ever expelled any organization from the Olympic movement. Okay, this is a big deal. And it started in 2019, and it was all backed. Basically, the IOC President Thomas Bach confirmed boxing would remain in 2024 and 2028, although there is conflicting reports that it's not on the list for 2028 now, since the list has come out since this article, even though there is an no international federation to run the sport. So there is an international federation, but the IOC is not recognizing it, right? Now, what is their claims on this? Well, basically, it's been a battle between the IBA and the IOC for quite a few years now. But basically, the story goes like this. This gender ideology has been creeping in. The IOC had one of their guys running the International Boxing Association. I believe the name is... Where is it? It's an Asian name. President C.K. Wu. President C.K. Wu. Right? So was running this organization for quite a number of years, and in 2016 there was a whole big controversy around the 2016 games with a whole bunch of, it seemed to be rigged fights. It was all corrupted and bad judging and referees, and so the IOC, it was all in furor. Basically, then there was basically the IBA. There was a bit of a claim back, you might say, right? So this guy, President C.K. Wu, was booted out, who is apparently a partner in the IOC as well. Now, we want to go straight to this statement here from the IBA, as an open letter, which is really, really fascinating. On behalf of the global boxing community, I demand Thomas Bach, who is the president of the IOC, and his team resign immediately. During Bach's administration, the IOC has deteriorated considerably, ceasing to be an organization that unites athletes and serves our sports communities. Instead, it has become a wealthy beyond imagination through artificial conflicts, which in turn is an assault to athletes. Right? This is really, really strange letter, powerful letter, saying that, hey, while the IOC is residing in luxury hotels, the athletes are living in substandard conditions, paying for their flights and hotels, funding their own preparations, hungry at the thing, whilst, they make it all happen, and it's not acknowledged. So it's basically modern day slavery. They don't even get prize money, and they don't even get real metal in the medals, right? Medalists should receive those ultimate prizes made of the corresponding medals. The IBA is like, it is taking shots at the IOC. And now, why does the IOC want to shut down the IBA? Well, because the groundswell movement within the IBA booted out the IOC management, which was driving it into the ground. Then it was this guy, Umar Kremlev, a Russian guy who's now the president of the IBA. And there was another guy before that in this article, we can see. Gafur Rakhmov. That was in 2020. Rakhmov was replaced by Russian, and then before that, so from about 2017, 2018, after all of this shit went down in 2016, there was a big change in the IBA. They booted out all the old guard, basically saying in this open letter, it's really powerful. What are they saying here? The former ABI president C.K. Wu was corrupt and took bribes, leading the organization to the collapse, right? So the International Boxing Association collapsed after 2016. They were taking bribes. There was all this furor around the refereeing and judgment. And they had an independent person, Professor McLaren, report, which thoroughly studied C.K. Wu's mismanagement that brought the ABA into the deep and almost insurmountable crisis. Back then, CK Wu was an IOC member, an IOC executive board member, and Buck's partner, right? So the IOC, going through all this gender ideology change, was also running the IBA. And we, the IBA boxing family, managed to save the IBA from bankruptcy, boot these dudes out, and are now pulling themselves back together and saying, hey, we're getting these biological males out of our sport, and we're going back to how we believe sport should be done, right? So they're going to give, this is the crazy thing, is the IBA is going to award all of the winners within boxing the prize money and actual real medals for them, I believe, so that even though they're not included in the Olympics, even though the Olympics Committee is saying, hey, we don't recognize the IBA is still going to give prize money to these boxers. But I don't think they're going to give it to these two boxers, which they basically have said Lin Yuting and Imana Khalif did not appeal their decision, which they basically said these guys are ineligible based on tests, 2 tests, independent tests, one in Istanbul at the World Championships, one in New Delhi at 2023, and basically said, hey, you guys failed the test, you can't keep competing, even though you've been competing for years. And Lin Yuting did not appeal the IBA's decision, and Imana Khalif initially appealed the decision to the Court of Arbitration, but withdrew, making these decisions legally binding. But then, of course, the IOC says, sorry, we're not recognizing the IBA, we're going to organize the boxing, and based on our rules, these two characters get to keep playing. Alarmingly, the World Boxing USA International Tournament saw Khalif compete in the finals, right? So because the IBA has been booted by the IOC, there is no international committee to organize the boxing. They've done it in-house for the last couple of years with their temporary crew, but they can't keep doing it. It's too much work for them, right? Because these guys are fucking parasites. They don't actually want to do the work. They just want to suck out all the energy from everyone else. So they don't actually there is a new spin-off organization called the World Boxing Organization that are trying to get it together, but the Olympics still doesn't recognize them. But so basically the IOC and these new little spin-offs are still allowing these people to compete against biological females. We absolutely do not understand why any organization would put a boxer at risk with what could bring a potential serious injury within the field of play. Okay, the main role of the referee in the ring is to manage the boxer's safety at all times. How is this reasonably practical when a boxer fails to meet the eligibility criteria to compete? The IBA will never support any boxing bouts between genders, as the organization puts the safety and well-being of our athletes first. We're protecting our women and their rights to compete. This is crazy. And now the IBA is going to award Angela Carini of Italy with the Olympic champion prize money. Right? This is they're basically head-to-head. The IBA is saying, no way, this is totally wrong. And there's a lot of other organizations saying this is also totally wrong. We've got Linda Blade from the International Confederation of Female Sport. We've got the Women's Declaration International. We have this other organization who put out this guide in collaboration with the ICFS. What are they called again? The Independent Council on Women's Sports. Let's have a look at these guys. The Independent Council on Women's Sports, HOME. They're suing the NCAA, which basically allowed Leah Thomas to win the gold medal. This is another incident of biological males competing against biological females in swimming. In 2022, they're elevating and empowering female athletes, protecting safety, fairness, and opportunity for girls and women, right? So these guys are doing a lot of legal challenges as well. And they're saying, hey, look, there is a serious thing going on here by allowing sports to be defined by gender, which can be, fluid and self-identified, and not by biological sex, because that's the most important determinant of athletic performance. Okay, now we've looked at that. Now this battle between the IOC and the IBA, it's really been going on for a while. Now they're saying, of course, the IOC, let's go back to this. In its final award, the Court of Arbitration for Sport noted that in the appeal decision, the IBA has not complied with the conditions set down by the IOC. Now you have to think this court is basically to help resolve the conflict between the IOC and the IBA. The IOC is saying, hey, we're the parent org. You want to participate in our games, you have to do it by our rules. And this is what we need from you. We need increased financial transparency and sustainability, including through diversification of revenues. Now, this is really interesting because in this open letter from the IBA, if we go back to it, is this the open letter? No, here. Oh yeah, so this is the open letter, basically saying it was corrupt, and the old guy who was an IOC, basically, plant, was rounded into the ground, and so the new guy, what's his name again, Umar Kremlev, and another fellow, they got in and they've secured funding. They've got this place all, the IBA thing all sorted now, and if we look at documents, I think it's documents, no, what are we looking at? It's financial support, about, here we go, no, that's it, was the financial integrity. Gazprom, I believe, right? So we've got a Russian guy. IBA's financial stability is one of our main goals. This is Umar Kremlev, and he's basically got Gazprom, which is a Russian state-owned gas company sponsoring the IBA. The IOC does not like this because the IOC has banned Russia from competing in the Olympics, right? Because of what's going on in Ukraine. And so they've also banned the IBA, which has now got a Russian president, and in that organizing committee, even though it's an international federation and is sponsored by Gazprom to keep it afloat. So this is what's going on. And now these guys are going to give money to the boxers, because even though the Olympics gives no prize money to anybody, these guys are going to give money to the boxers. And on top of that, they are going to give Angela Carini the prize money. And they're basically, I can see what's going to happen here now. If Kelev or Ping win any of these fights or win any medals, they're just not going to recognize it, which is fascinating stuff. So this is really what's going on. This is the forefront of the gender wars. It's the tip of the iceberg. There's a massive iceberg underneath. Dr. Wu Qingku, also known as CK Wu, led ABA, this is the boxing unit under its old name, for 11 years before stepping down in 2017. So he was running it right up until the point, running it into the ground. This is why there was all this furore around what was happening in the 2016 Olympics. And he was banned from life for the organization for gross negligence and financial mismanagement. Okay, so he obviously denies that. This is coming from the actual Olympic Games themselves, their own statement. And so basically, obviously, when the International Olympic Committee stopped recognizing them, the IBA wanted to appeal that, right? So we've got a statement. They went to this Court of Arbitration of Sport, who, right, when these two boxers had the opportunity to appeal their decision, they could have gone to this Court of Arbitration. They didn't. They chose not to, which made their decision in the IBA legally binding. And now in this situation, the Court of Arbitration has said, hey, you've got to uphold the IOC's conditions if you want to work with them. So increase the financial transparency and sustainability through diversification of revenues. They don't like that the Russians are sponsoring this organization. The IBA has not changed its process relating to referees and judges to ensure its integrity, including a monitoring period for IBA's own competitions ahead of the Olympic Games. So basically saying, hey, we don't like how you changed the judges, even though the way we were doing it was fucked up and got a lot of heat in Rio. We want you to go back the other way. And the IBA had not ensured the full and effective implementation of all measures proposed by the governance reform group established by the IOC, including a change of culture. What does that mean, perhaps? What does this change of culture mean? Because this is what the IOC is at wars with all of these organizations. I think it's also with weightlifting, with aquatic sports, with other international federations and organizations that are competing in the Olympics, but expelling these transgender people. But particularly around boxing for some reason, even though the Olympics likes to let everyone else organize their relative categories, with boxing, the IOC said, hey, no, because you took out our guy from the IBA and are now running it yourselves and you got Russians involved and it's got Russian sponsorship to keep it going, we don't have Russia in the Olympics, so you don't get to participate and organize it either, right? This is some really, really deep stuff, and it's all around this idea of gender, okay? This gender and the sex-based thing. So what have we got here? We've looked at the statements from the IBA, which is like very, very powerful statements, like holds no punches. They're saying, hey, we stand by this thing. We don't want biological females being beaten up by biological males. The International Olympic Committee is saying, hey, we're not open to further discussions regarding the IBA's involvement in Olympic boxing events. There is no ongoing process. For us, the case is closed. The IOC, first time ever, said, nah, we're not even going to recognize the International Boxing Association. It's not on the list for the 2028 Olympics because they can't organize it in-house, because they are fucking parasites and don't know how to produce anything. They're just sucking up all the energy from everyone else. We've got Linda Blade and all of these women's organizations, biological female organizations that are advocating for sex-based sports. And we have here the International Olympic Committee that they're saying, well, hang on,
I think
guys,
everyone would agree you don't change the rules during a competition. No one should change the rules during a competition. Everyone needs to have
don't change the rules
of the rules.
That's fair enough.
On the wider issue, there still is neither scientific or political consensus.
On the rules, right? I'm saying fair enough. It's like, yeah, you don't want to keep changing the rules. It's going to mess with people. That's why they're trying to hold it, because we've slowly changed the rules over the last 20 years. Don't change the rules. Don't exclude these guys, right? Because the IBA, when they did these tests and they found out what was going on, they excluded these two boxes because, it was halfway through competitions and things, but because they were receiving a lot of complaints from the coaches, a lot of complaints from the biologically female players, they conducted these tests, they went back and they realized, oh shit, these guys have been competing in here for years under the old guard and the old rules that allowed them to get in. We need to expel them. These people are taking a stand against what is a cultural war and undermining this idea of biological male and biological female.
On this issue.
Look at this.
It's not a black and white issue. And we would, at the IOC, be very interested to hear of such a solution.
Right, they want to hear of a solution on how to define male and female. But unfortunately, they don't want to hear from these women's advocacy groups, right? The International Confederation on Female Sports, the Women's Declaration of Independence, all of these organizations that are really advocating for this, right? They prefer to listen to the trans activists. Okay, so we've looked at this, we'll go back to this article and get this one again.
Consensus on this, and we would be the first to act on this should a common understanding be reached. But as we say, that has yet to be the case across sport in general. On the injury.
Right, so this is what they're saying. They're saying there is no black and white way to define what is man, what is woman. This is a deliberate attempt to undermine our rational, objective reality, to have us floating around in confusion land and not really know what's real and what's not real. This is some of the most evil, pernicious shit that is in existence, people. Don't let it fool you. Don't let it fool you.
About women's boxing. And we have two boxers who are born as a woman, who have been raised as a woman.
Now, this is technically not correct because a woman is an adult female. They are born as a girl, they are raised as a girl, right? You could even argue they're born as a female, raised as a female because of this difference in sex disorder. Difference in sex, what's it called again, the wording? What's the DSD? Difference in sexual development. My apologies, I'm going to offend people without that, right? So because of these differences in sexual development, you can see how they would get, people would think they're a girl. You would even think they're a girl until puberty hits, right?
Who have
this is why it's deceptive.
Passport as a woman and who have competed for many years as woman.
Right, so technically, kind of telling the truth, right? Born as a girl, raised as a girl, got a passport as a girl, competed as a woman in these sports for many years. What do? We're hands are tied, we're following our own rules, we're just going to keep going with it. Pretending there's nothing wrong. People know, if you've watched these fights, you know that there's something wrong, right? This is not a fair fight. We have biological males who know they are biological males, right? The International Boxing Association has done the test. They said you don't get to compete with us. The International Olympic Committee has said, well, we're not going to recognize you. We're still going to let them compete. We're going to organize it ourselves, even though we don't have the capacity to. And now, well, in 2028, we're just not going to do it because it's too hard. Unless you guys set up a new organization. Now, you can see there's people that are desperate to continue this boxing, and they're willing to sacrifice these, I guess, these values to keep the boxing in Olympics. Let's have a look at
and
this.
This is the clear definition of a woman.
This is the clear definition of a woman, right? Because they were born a woman, raised a woman, they got woman on their passport, and they've been competing as women. This is basically our definition. We don't care about DNA tests, basically, is what they're saying. And by their own rules, they're correct. That's their rules.
There was never any doubt about them being a woman. What we see now is that some want to own the definition of who is a woman. And there I can only invite them to come up with a scientific based, a new definition of who is a woman.
See that new definition, right? We don't want the old definition, right? Which is basically XX chromosome. We want a new definition that's scientifically based, which is basically impossible because we've already established the science, right? We've already established the science.
And how can somebody being born, raised, competed and having a passport as a woman cannot be considered a woman? To quote here the Italian boxer who was competing against the Algerian female boxer, she said, you know, these controversies have definitely made me sad, and I feel sorry for my opponent, who is also only here to fight.
Okay, so now they're using the words of the Italian, you know, who's basically succumbing to the mob pressure to conform. And I'm seeing it also in my friends' feeds on the Facebook. They're conforming to this social pressure. Hey, conform, right? Don't stand up for what you believe in. All of these women's organizations are standing up for what they believe in. What do you stand up for and believe in, right? Are you going to let this woke mind virus creep into your psyche and accept this? Because right now, at the Olympic level, we have biological males beating up biological females, and everyone's cool with it, right? And you might say, oh, it happened in 2020. It's been happening for years. No one said anything then. That doesn't excuse it now, right? 2020, 2021, they had to postpone the Olympics because of COVID. Everyone was distracted with COVID, right? But this is what's creeping in. Is this what's really what we want in our culture? And you might say, hey, this is just a distraction from the real stuff, right? We've got Iran and Russia and Israel and the US ready to go head to head. We've got the Ukraine war. We've got civil riots in England, man. Shit's going down. It's crazy. This is the unraveling of fiat currency, ungrounded from reality. It's all coming out in the wash. We're about to see everything happen in the next few weeks, months, and years, because this is the Great Awakening. Now, what else have I got here to say, right? We've got the IBA at odds with the IOC. They're supporting their position. They're holding down. They're doubling down. You know, they're the extreme right Nazis. They're going to give Angela Carini Olympic champion prize money. They're giving that to all of the boxers, even though they've been excluded from the Olympics. And this is what's happening today in the world. That's my take on it. Let me know what you think. Drop a comment below. Like, subscribe. Of course, keep the comments respectful, even if we disagree. Love you all, and I'll talk to you next time. Peace.